Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. Today I am doing a completely different book from the book I reviewed on Tuesday. I am reviewing Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. This is a classic late 19th century novel from 1882. It's a Penguin classic. Thomas Hardy is probably my favorite late 1800s author. Far from the Madding Crowd is my favorite of his, but if you want a book with a horrific and bonkers twist, Jude the Obscure is just what? Highly recommended, though it is a bit distressing. Anyway, Two on a Tower is not Hardy's strongest novel, I would argue, but it's short, enjoyable, and is full of his typical tearing down of social conventions that are toxic to everyone. Hardy was a big believer in how Victorian ideology about sex and gender harms everybody, and his novels are always focused around pointing out how constraining sexuality and expectations of purity are, well, stupid, and they ruin everyone's good time. So this book is no exception. First of all, what is it about? Lady Constantine breaks all the rules of social decorum when she falls in love with the beautiful youth Swithin St. Cleeve, her social inferior and 10 years her junior. The tower in question is a monument converted into an astronomical observatory where together the lovers sweep the heavens. Science and romance are destined to collide, however, as ambition, work, and the pressures of the outside world intrude upon the pair. Yeah, okay, so, scandal! A woman dating a dude who is 8 in the book, 8 years younger than her? How dare she? And yes, for those of you who haven't read this book, that's the core problem of the novel. It's asinine today, but it's also fascinating. It's so interesting to see how so much of the storylines of these novels depend on social control of women's sexuality, where today, thankfully, an 8-year difference, as well as some of the other things that happen in the book, are barely even noticed, or at least aren't the cause of social ruination of a person. Then again, if I had a 28-year-old friend who was dating a 20-year-old, I'd probably be like, what do you see in this guy? But really, though, as long as it's not a relationship with an unhealthy or coercive power dynamic, you do you. Be happy. I don't care. The thing is, the issue in this novel isn't so much as he's taking advantage of a younger person or manipulating him, but that she's ruining his chances in life by tying him down so early. It's definitely more about a woman acting improperly than about saving a man from possible emotional harm. And Hardy definitely shows how this is a stupid idea that needs to stop. I'm going to talk about spoilers in a bit, but as a spoiler-free review, this novel is easy to read, the characters are well-defined and make choices that make sense to their characterizations, and there is a considerable amount of tension for a novel where not a ton happens. It's not as lyrically written as some of Hardy's others, but the concept of the novel and how it's structured is intricately plotted. Given its premise as a romance, I'll get into that a little bit later, as to be expected, the characters don't get together right away. They come together, bypass one another, drift, and come back. Both physically, they're always missing one another while walking, and a lot of their story depends on trying to meet up using guesswork of when the other person will happen to be around. Ah, the good old days. And romantically, much in the same way planets do in orbit. As such, the stories focus on astronomy, as Swithin's profession in the book, pairs in a clever way with the structure and flow of the novel. It's quite brilliant, really. And yes, the names in this novel are absolutely wild. Swithin St. Cleeve and Viviette Constantine. What are these names? Who names their children this? Anyway. Along with the obvious critique of the hyper-control of women's bodies by society, there is a huge focus on wealth in this book as well. Two on a Tower is clearly arguing that had either of them been rich, they wouldn't have had any issue with their relationship, as money lets you do whatever the hell you want. But because Swithin marrying Vivette would have ruined his chances to make connections in society and obtain an inheritance, and because it would have been Vivette stepping down to a lower social level, they couldn't be together openly. Neither of them discusses this problem in dialogue or anything like that. It's just something they understand as society to function within, and they work under the pretense of that. It's mind-boggling, really, that society developed in that way. Mind-bogglingly fascinating. Yet, as much as I love the pairing of theme and structure and the critiques of society, the story does follow a plotline that isn't hard to predict, excepting, of course, for the last paragraph of the book. In that regard, it's a little formulaic and simple. Overall, though, it's an enjoyable, albeit rather depressing read, but not one I'd recommend you start with when it comes to Hardy. Start with Far from the Madding Crowd. That one is killer. Thanks for watching. I'm going to pop into some spoilers now for a minute or two if you want to stick around. I'm basically just going to be telling you the plot of the story because it's kind of crazy. So it's ridiculous. And here we go. So Viviette starts off married to this dick of a man, Blount Constantine. Again, the names in this book. And on their property is a tower. She visits the tower one time because she's curious as well as bored, as her dick of a husband is traveling Africa being a colonizer. She runs into Swithin up there, who's studying astronomy. They chat, they fall in love, etc., etc. She buys him a big telescope, typical way to show a man your affections, right? You buy him a big phallic object. So, when it turns out her husband has died in Africa, they decide to get married, but in secret because her age gap is a bit of a scandal, as well as the other stuff I talked about, like social class, blah, blah, blah. There are some mishaps surrounding her brother thinking he's sleeping with Swithin outside of marriage that are resolved, but then it turns out Blount didn't die when everyone said he did, so the marriage between Viviette and Swithin is annulled. They decide they're going to redo their vows because they love each other. But before they do, Viviette finds a will that would have given Swithin a small fortune if he remained unmarried until he was 25. Because she is poor, due to Blount's poor money management, and Swithin is also poor, as he's the son of a farmer, she tells him they won't get married, but he should do this astronomy tour and get the money, and then they'll get married when he's 25. This is about 4 years in the future. He agrees with reluctance. He does take a lot of convincing to decide to do this, and she tells him she wants him to go and not talk to her or tell her where he's going. Don't tell her where to send mail because she's too depressed about it. She just wants to, live the next 4 years and then wait for him to come back. He says, okay, I guess. Of course, the day he's set to leave for the other side of the world, she finds out she's pregnant. This would make it out of wedlock, so she tries to get to him in time. It's actually quite stressful. I'm like, oh, the stress alone maybe will solve the problem. But no dice. She tells her brother, absolutely distraught by this. She basically unloads the entire situation on him. He was a bit of a lout earlier, but he has her back, and he does the best thing he can think of. He talks to this dude who wants to marry her. So that was a subplot I didn't really mention. There's this, reverend or something. I don't know anything about religious orders. So some dude that's not a priest, but he's religious. Anyway, he wants to marry her, and of course she turned him down because she thought she was married to Swithin. Also, she didn't like this man. But anyway, given she isn't due to hear back from Swithin for 6 months, and obviously baby would be there around that time, she's like, shit, and agrees to marry the guy. Swithin comes back years later to find that A, he has a 4-year-old with his same curly hair, and B, Viviette is a bit worn down by the last few years, but she's a widow again. They have this awkward moment in the tower, and it seems like they're just going to kind of go their separate ways, and I was kind of like, it's too bad. But then he changes his mind and says he wants to marry her. He rushes up, and they have a lot of smooches, and then she dies of a fucking heart attack or something in his arms. What? So yeah, not a happy ending. A happy ending would have been great, love prevails, but it wouldn't have hammered home the points as hard without the tragedy. So, Hardy also does not usually write happy endings. There's a couple that have a happy ending, but Jude the Obscure, woo, Tess of D'Urberville, woo. Now, though, does this make it a romance? By today's happily ever after standards, probably not. But back then, yes, because romance back then didn't mean a fluffy love story you read, for titillation, but a story with certain themes, love being one of them. So yes, it's a romance, but it's no Jane Austen. I will say, though, I very much take issue with how Viviette is described when she's 33. I am 37. Yes, I have some gray hairs, but I don't look too bad. According to the men in her life, though, and the narration, she is pretty much an old hag at 33. She's pretty much living in the retirement home. She might as well just die. I guess she does. She has a few wrinkles and some gray hairs. She's near death. 33. God, I thought she'd be 33 again. Anyway, yeah. So thanks for watching. Let me know what your favorite Tom Hardy book is. If it's this one, that's great for you. And let me know what Tom Hardy book I should read next. I've read this one, Far from the Madding Crowd, Jude the Obscure, Tess of D'Urbervilles. Have I read anything else? The Mayor Casper. Did I read that one? Anyway, tell me what Tom Hardy book I should read next, and I'll read it sometime next year.